And Larry? Must be cold back in that corner, huh? You got the cap on. I was just in Denver this week, so got my fill of cold weather. Of course, I'm going to Canada next week, so that's another story. Anyway, let's get to it. Conscious relationships. There's a wonderful book called Conscious Loving that we normally have in the bookstore. I don't know if there's any in right now, but we'll always get more because I think it's the best relationship book that I've found in terms of really looking at your relationships. And primarily, you're looking at what we might call your primary relationship if you have a significant other. But also, it also applies to other, I would say, close relationships. And it doesn't matter if you're man or woman or gay or straight or whatever the circumstances are, whether you're in a relationship or not. Matter of fact, I usually tell people that when I'm teaching relationships, you're at an advantage if you're not in one because you can kind of do some preparatory work. It's sort of like it's easier to build a road when there's nobody driving on it. But when you're already in a relationship, and you might find it needs a lot of remodeling, well, the relationship's still going on as you're trying to do the remodeling, and that can be a bigger challenge. So people often say, well, gee, you're talking about relationships and I'm not in one, and I'd say, good for you. You're in one, you just haven't figured it out yet. So let's just look at some of these ideas. And Stuart Emery actually wrote another book about relationship that's very good. I use some of his material too. He says, in a romantic relationship, what I really want from you is a more joyful experience of myself. I will say I love you if in your presence I experience myself as a joyful, lovable, and capable person. And that is actually what you want from me. See, often we think of being in a relationship, and we're kind of conditioned by our literature, by the media, the movies and the things and all the stuff we read and all the poor me cowboy songs that we listen to on the radio, that love is about two people who are incomplete coming together to be complete. Okay, which is often true, it just doesn't work. The mathematics of relationship are multiplication, not addition. So if you have a half a person and a half a person, if it were addition, a half and a half would equal a whole, right? But it's not, it's multiplication. So, let's go back to like fourth grade. And what's a half times a half? A quarter. Yeah, when two people meet and they see themselves as less than, and they meet and they find someone else that they think will fulfill them, who is also seeing themselves as less than, you don't end up with a relationship, you end up with an entanglement. And it can be okay, but usually it's not. So what we really seek is for each individual to realize him or herself as a fully realized being, and then to be in relationship with another fully realized being. Now, are any of us completely fully realized? No. We're all works in progress. But when we recognize that sort of would be the ideal and we can aspire to that within ourselves, we stop relying on the other person in the relationship to give us what we need. And that shifts the relationship from one of needing one another to one of choosing to be with one another. And it's an entirely different energy. And we will all do this somewhat imperfectly, by the way. So we talk about self-love or self-esteem, what Gregory's going to be talking about next week in his workshop. And there's really I'm just going to do a real quick thing. There's really three basic elements of self-love, self-acceptance, self-esteem, self-worth, whatever term you want to use, it's all the same thing. The first is accountability. Someone that has a high regard for themselves tends to see themselves as accountable for what unfolds in their lives. They're not always blaming other people for their problems. Has anyone here ever blamed anyone else for a problem? I know none of you have, so we won't even go into that. Before you were enlightened, you may have, but I'm sure you don't do that anymore. The second thing is there's a sense of optimism, and optimism here is simply a positive expectancy of the future. Now, it's easy to be optimistic when you feel like you're in control of your life, right? And if you're accountable for what happens in your life, why wouldn't you be optimistic? It's when we think that the control is outside of ourselves and other people have control over our lives that we become pessimistic. So optimism is a naturally healthy thing. In fact, a lot of employers today, when they test people who are prospective employees, they do test for optimism because research shows that people that have a sense of optimism tend to do better, usually because they're also more accountable. And if you have someone working for you, you'd like them to be accountable and optimistic, wouldn't you? Okay. But yet you might have noticed there are some pessimistic people in some places of work. I don't understand that, but it still happens. And this is the interesting one, the last one. I think it's very interesting. The ability to have positive relationships with a variety of people. Because when I don't accept who I am, I'm threatened by differences. So people with low self-esteem tend to kind of cluster around people that are like them. You know, and when someone really is different, they become a threat. That's really what prejudice is. You see. Now, I always tell the story about my mom, and my mom who passed away a few years ago. She had this quality. She could not imagine that someone would not want to meet her. Really, you know, so she would go to a party or an event, and she'd look around for the most interesting person, meaning the person that looked most different, and she'd go up and talk to him. Introduce herself. Hi, I'm Mary Ellen Lockard, and I'd like to meet you, find out more about you, and ask questions about him. And occasionally the person would say, get away from me. I don't know who you are. But she'd say, okay, and then she'd go look for the next most interesting person. You know, it's like his loss. And she had friends literally all over the world because she had that kind of a sense of self that enabled her to go up to someone and just start a conversation. See, it was a sense of self. She accepted herself, so she was willing to be rejected by someone else. See, that's often what keeps us from going up and meeting people is we're afraid of being rejected. Remember back in high school, if you had to dance, you know, and all the girls are on one side of the gym and the boys are on the other side of the gym. And every now and then a boy gets up the courage and goes across, you know, walks all the way over and asks the girl to dance. And if she says no, you got to walk back like, oh. See, what stops you is not walking across. It's having to come back, you know, and everybody's laughing at you. Right? So we come out of that, quite often we come out of that age of high school, that adolescent age, you know, kind of thinking, well, I'm not thinking too well of ourselves, you know, in those social kinds of contexts. You know, I was listening to Prairie Home Companion yesterday driving back up from San Diego, and he was talking about one of the goofy products they make up commercials about, but he says it takes the taste of shame and humiliation out of your mouth. He said it's great for teenagers. You know. So, but self-acceptance is when we've learned, usually for many of us later in life, that all that was nonsense. And that really, that no matter what we've done or not done in the past, we are essentially worthy. We are worthy simply because we exist. And sometimes that helps you kind of screw up your courage and get out there in the world a little more actively than you might have otherwise. So someone who has a high degree of self-love, self-acceptance, self-esteem would have these three qualities: accountability, optimism, and the ability to have positive relationships with a wide variety of people. Okay? This is one of Savage Chickens. It's kind of an interesting cartoon thing. And it says, all TV commercials paraphrased, you're not good enough. Right? I mean, somebody's trying to sell you something. What, you know, they got to tell you the way you are is obviously inadequate. So if you have this product, you know, some of you are wearing those products right now. Right? But isn't that how they sell us stuff? You know, they get you to feel a little bit inadequate without the product. You know, I'd really be adequate if I had that car or that deodorant or that suit or that pair of shoes or that purse. You're not going to go out looking like that, are you? What will people think? See? So this advertising works on the belief that most people are so concerned about what other people think that they're willing to buy a product they don't need or that looks terrible on them. You ever seen a fashion victim? wearing the latest trends, even though it looks awful, right? And then other people, well, I'm not going to tell her because, you know. So the field test for self-esteem is, am I doing things that are not in my own best interest because of what other people might think? Yeah, that's the field test. What's your primary motivation? Before you leave the house in the day, when you look in the mirror that last time, are you thinking, oh my God, what are people going to think about me? You know, and it's not to say it doesn't cross your mind, but I'm talking about where it then will control what you do next. Oh, I can't go out looking like this, you know. I'll call in sick because I got bed hair, you know. Carl Jung said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. So when we get into relationship with others, we're transformed. We become different by the connection, by the experience of talking to or being in the space of or connecting with at all the different levels in which relationship happens. So relationship is an alchemical kind of a process. We are different based on the relationships we've had. And it's based on how we have seen them, how we have experienced ourselves in those relationships, and the changes we have made as a result. Some relationships, people are very good at helping you to see more of yourself and to build yourself up. And you've probably had some relationships where people were tearing you down. And to the degree that you saw yourself through those eyes, you have probably changed yourself in the process. So I want to look at this. This is from the Hendricks book, Conscious Loving. I want to look at what they call the 9 traps of unconscious loving. And unconscious loving is a recognition that, and so is conscious loving, by the way, all relationships are about a series of agreements. And those agreements are either spoken or conscious or unspoken unconscious. An example might be you get married and you have your first Thanksgiving together. And you realize that you have a different idea of what Thanksgiving is. The traditional thing, you know, it might be, what do you mean you don't make mashed potatoes? It's not Thanksgiving without mashed potatoes. And by the way, the toilet seat was up again this morning. You know, that kind of stuff, you know, where, well, we never talked about that. You know, well, I just assumed that you would know that this is the way it should be. You ever had that in a relationship? Those are the agreements that you had that you never talked about, and it turns out you didn't agree on. So really, a lot of the unconscious agreements are lack of agreement that are assumed. Well, I assumed since I married you, and you're a woman and I'm a man, that you would keep the inside of the house clean and I'd cut the lawn. That's a reasonable assumption, isn't it? Because all of my assumptions are reasonable. I'm a reasonable person, aren't you? Right? And then the other person says, no, I thought you would take care of the inside of the house and I would cut the lawn. And I would think, isn't that strange? Well, why don't you do both? So we hire somebody. You know, that's kind of what it boils down to, right? But, you know, that's what I'm talking about in terms of those expectations, and you get in a relationship and you're just shocked that the person doesn't agree with you. So let's look at some of these traps, because these are really fun. Trap 1. In my relationships, I let people get away with destructive behavior. Okay, this is a relationship trap. It's about being unconscious. You get into a relationship. It could be a friendship. It could be a familial relationship, like a brother, sister, parent, child, whatever. It could be a romantic relationship. And you find the other person doing destructive things, and you let them do it. You know, you don't like it, but you're thinking, who am I to stop them? Or if I do say something, maybe they'll be destructive against me. So the destructive behavior goes forward. The second trap is I form relationships with people who let me get away with destructive behavior. You see? As opposed to holding you accountable for your own well-being. And sometimes 1 and 2 are going on at the same time. Usually that's the case. The third trap is I'm in a relationship that resembles my parents' relationship. Now, this is a sign that you're not having your own relationship. That you are, and Carl Jung, by the way, said that about 75% of relationships consist of people living out the unlived lives of their parents. 75%. I mean, look around you. There's 75% of people in here that aren't having a relationship as good as yours. Isn't that how that works? So he would say when you get into the marital bed, it's not just the husband and the wife, it's both sets of parents are there too. And since the parents were living out the unlived lives of their parents, there's 4 sets of grandparents. You better have a big bed. Because all those unlived expectations are in the bed, in the marriage, in the relationship, in so many cases. Trap 4, I form relationships with people whose personalities and behaviors resemble that of one or both of my parents. Okay, it said, it used to be a common thing, you're always looking, the girls are looking for somebody like daddy or not like daddy. And the boys are looking for someone like mom or not like mom. And sometimes it's really clear. There was an episode of 2.5 Men once where Charlie was dating a girl that looked just like his mother, a realtor with the same clothes, and he didn't see it at all, and everybody else could see it. Because when we're doing that, we don't know we're doing it. It's usually a subconscious process. Trap 5, out of reactions to parental relationships, I create relationships that are the opposite of my parents. See, that's still not necessarily your own relationship. The primary motivator is not to be like that. So, and this is not uncommon at all, by the way. Trap 6. Out of childhood trauma, a pattern is generated, and I play out that pattern repeatedly in my relationships. I become the victim, or I become the perpetrator over and over and over and over, even though I say this time will be different. See, and if you can imagine, as we're growing up, we create a script of our lives and what we are and how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And when we get into relationships, really what we're doing is it's like we're casting the play. Right? And occasionally you change the cast, but they have the same lines. So if you don't rewrite the script, the next relationship tends to look like the last one. So part of what we need to do, and how do I change the script? Well, I have to bring it to the conscious level, right? So this is talking about unconscious relationships. Unconscious relationships tend to follow these kinds of patterns because we're not making the relationship conscious. And until you make something conscious, you don't change a subconscious pattern as long as it stays subconscious. We simply look around for another way to live out that pattern, even though consciously we're looking for something new. Subconsciously, unless the subconscious changes, we will continuously be guided into the same pattern. It'll just look a little different, but it'll essentially be the same thing. The 7th trap, I participate in continual conflict in my relationships, or I avoid conflict at all costs. It's interesting when you have one partner in the relationship that is part A and one is part B. One wants conflict all the time and the other one doesn't want any. Do you find yourself refusing to go into a place where being really afraid of being angry? And if you see anger begin to be expressed, you may be shut down. Or do you don't feel alive unless there's a whole lot of turmoil? And again, you may not consciously like it, but subconsciously you'll find yourself getting into turmoil over and over, and you're usually blaming the other person. There's a great country song called "You Ain't Much Fun Since I Quit Drinking." Sort of speaks to this idea. I would be fine if you would just learn how to behave in a certain way. That kind of thing. Or the other side, my ex-wife grew up in a house where her parents were very loving, but when her father drank, it didn't just get ugly, it got violent. And there was only anger when he was drinking. So as an adult, she found herself in a situation where as soon as if voices got raised, that had to stop. So she became aware of this, and we did some work on it and so forth. But, for quite a while, when the little kids were little, the kids would make noise. Stop, quiet. And I say, why are you saying that? Because they're not supposed to be that way. See, there's always a rational reason why you're doing the irrational thing. So that's how it can manifest. See, her recollection, her reactive mechanism was when voices are raised, somebody's about to get hurt. Even though she didn't think that consciously. It was deep inside of her. So if we're raised in an environment like that, we carry our response mechanism, our way of dealing with it, into the new relationship, even though the people that we encounter in the new relationship may have no relation to the earlier behavior. You ever been in a relationship with someone that it was clear they were treating you like the person they used to be in a relationship with? Everybody put your hands up, because you all have. That's what happens. Until we make the patterns conscious and consciously change them, we bring the same patterns from the past relationship into the present relationship. It's just what we do. So that's what he's talking about here, or they're talking about. Trap 8, with the possibility of success at hand, I mess up. You get that close, that close. I thought this time I'd finally make it, but no. Just like all the other times. The world isn't fair, Everybody's out to get me. You got to be connected, or you got to have friends in high places, or you can't get ahead. Whatever it is, whatever the rationalization is. If I didn't have all this crazy family around me, I'd be a big success. Take all my energy just to kind of keep them under control and to deal with their crap. Or I'd be right at the top. Trap 9, because I never have learned true independence, I create relationships in which I perpetuate dependence. Ooh. Well, it's not my fault, if she were just a little more supportive, everything would be okay. I have to be constantly present to take care of her. That's dependence, that I have to take care of her. I'm dependent on her. Let's see. She'd probably be fine if I didn't take care of her. I'm projecting that onto her. Whoever she is. It's not Dorianne, by the way. She's with the kids today, so nobody tell her anything that we said in here today. I find our relationship works best when we have secrets. So here's what we want to do out of this. We look at these traps, and if any of these kind of ring true, and I know none of them rang true for you, but you're thinking of other people that they ring true for, like my parents, right? We have to try to make these patterns conscious. We have to have conversations about them. We have to begin to share in our close relationships what's going on with us. Even if it doesn't make sense. How are you feeling now? And not just tell me fine, but you might say, right now I'm feeling attacked. Right now I'm feeling afraid. Right now I'm feeling really angry. And making it safe to do that. Because the reason we don't have those conversations is either because it wasn't safe in a previous relationship, so we carried that pattern unconsciously into the new one, or we have evidence in the current relationship that it's not safe. If I bring something up that's troubling me, I get shut down, or somebody withdraws, or I get yelled at. Because they're playing out their own patterns unconsciously. So many relationships. You ever get behind a couple, or you're driving on a long road trip, and you get behind a couple in front of you, and you can see they haven't talked for 300 miles? Except, I got to pee. Shut up. How did we get that way? How do we shut down that way? We shut down because it becomes unsafe to share what's really going on with us, so we keep it to ourselves. So a conscious relationship requires a commitment to be uncomfortable on the other person's behalf. To say, tell me what I don't want to hear, and I will listen. And then I'll tell you what you don't want to hear. But not from a place of getting even, from a place of sharing, so that we can create a new subconscious reality that works. So one of the things they talk about in the Conscious Loving book, among other things, is to be microscopically honest in a relationship, which means actively honest, to share what's really going on with you, to share what you really think, and not to leave things unsaid, even though the other person may not want to hear it. So what Dorianne and I did early in the relationship, we actually worked with this book before we got married, was we agreed that it was okay to upset each other. And that anyone when we get upset, we had the right to take a time out. She might say something, because what I learned pretty quickly, which I didn't know in my 25-year internship marriage that I had before this one, I may not be the person to teach relationships, except I don't think you learn until you fail. What I recognized was that when she said something and I reacted in a negative way, it was because she was telling me something I just didn't want to hear that was true. Hate that. Don't you tell me. Oh, right. You know. So I would say I need 20 minutes and go out and take a walk or whatever. Then when I calm down, come back and discuss it, which usually meant come back and apologize. And that's what happened, and it became okay to do that. And stuff didn't get left unsaid, and I didn't hold in the energy of trying to keep something from her that she already knew. The people you're in relationship with are not stupid. They know what's going on with you, and you have either made it safe for them to talk about or unsafe for them to talk about it. And same with you and them. Stuart Emery says, love is when I am concerned with your relationship with your own life rather than your relationship to mine. Because if you're not whole, perfect, and complete in your own mind, our relationship is not going to work as well as it can. I need to get that. And stop thinking, well, you should put aside your crap because I got an issue right now. I want you to deal with me. Maybe that's not the time to do that. Maybe it's not right to keep everything that disturbs you inside and not bother the other person with it. Unless in keeping it inside you're healing it rather than just stuffing it down. But if you have another person you're in relationship with, a friend, and it can be a friend, it can be a family member, it doesn't have to be husband, wife, or a significant other or whatever it is. How safe is it within that relationship for people to really be honest? And can you cultivate that space? Because if we're not really honest with one another, we suffer. Simple as that. Anything you withhold that is uncomfortable for you causes suffering. And when you're suffering because you withheld stuff, you're not at your best in the relationship, are you? At best, you're phony. Phony cheerfulness. Don't you love that? How is everything? Everything's fine. I'm just feeling fantastic. And inside, you're, well, why are you eating Tums all the time? Why do you have that acid reflux thing going on? What's that about? That's about something that's being stuffed. Something that's not safe to reveal. So the body, when you internalize it, you give it to the body, and the body becomes dysfunctional because of it. This stuff is all connected, folks. It's not like your body's independent of what's going on in your mind. Your body is the emotional storehouse of your life. Every feeling you stuff affects your body in a negative way. Every time you're in a non-loving space, your body is affected in a negative way. So what does it say? If we have conscious relationships, if we make it safe to interact in a loving, positive, uplifting way, our health will improve. I'd rather go to the gym and eat supplements. So 2 elements here that lead to this also is commitment versus attachment. What's the difference? Okay. Commitment is something like this. I'm going to stick with you and support your experience of well-being unless my life or my love of life is in peril. An attachment looks like I'm stuck with you or without you. But see, it's all an internal process. See, I can only be attached. My attachment has nothing to do with the other person. It's like jealousy has nothing to do with the person you're jealous of. Jealousy is, I don't love me, therefore I suspect you don't love me. You'd be crazy to love me, so you must love someone else. So I will accuse you of loving someone else anytime I detect any evidence of it. And you will initially think that's attractive, but after a while it will get very tedious and very old, and after a while I will drive you to someone else, and I will say, you see, I knew it. Jealousy has nothing to do with the other person. You cannot be jealous of someone else if you fully love yourself. Because if you fully love yourself, you don't want anybody in relationship that doesn't want to be with you. You don't want to hold on to them against their will. That's attachment. You're not leaving me. You know, if I can't have you, no one can. A la OJ. And what was that all about? You know? Half of Shakespeare's plays are about people who had all these unconscious patterns that they didn't know how to deal with, so in the end, everybody's dead. Do you know how much we shorten our lives by not knowing how to be in conscious relationship? So conscious relationship is being willing to speak your truth and to hear their truth. Boy, this is long. But this is the closing statement for the talk. Make appreciating your loved ones your highest priority. In fact, turn appreciating into an art form. Speak at least one appreciation per hour. Place a very low priority on improving the other person. Never attempt to improve the other person without asking permission first, and never use criticism or blame as an improvement tool. So think if you took that statement to heart and practiced it in your life, would there be any difference? And would it be a good difference or a bad difference, do you think? And I know what comes up, as I read this the first time years ago, what came up for me is, well, what if they don't do that back to me? Sounds like a trick. What if they don't? You learn something, right? I'm not going to appreciate until I'm appreciated. That's stupid, isn't it? It's like saying I'll be peaceful when the rest of the world's peaceful. You know, who am I to initiate anything good? Just do a little internal inventory right now. How much have you shown appreciation for the people in your life in the last week? It's not about feeling guilty. It's just about awareness. Could you do better? Do you think it would improve the quality of your relationships if you did? And if the answer to those is yes, what's the problem? What's stopping you? Other than maybe the awareness that you're getting right now. Now, oh, I got the awareness now, so I'll do it. But here's my suggestion. Don't do it on a contingency basis. Don't do it based on what you're going to get back. Just because you've decided to live a better life doesn't give you permission to make anyone else live a better life. But I think what you'll find is when you create that space, the lover in the other person will reciprocate. How long since you've spoken to the lover in the other person? From the lover in you. The lover is not resentful. The lover doesn't hold grudges. The lover doesn't keep score. The lover doesn't count the number of times you've been slighted. The lover just wants to love, and it will respond. But you have to invite it. Invite your lover into the room and see if you don't entice the other lover into the room. In a friendship, hell, with the guy at the 7-Eleven. I'm determined to leave a smile on the face of every convenience store clerk I encounter. What can I do to help you have a better day? Probably nothing, except acknowledge they might not be having a good one. What's that cost? Final story. Years ago, I was at a ministers' conference, my very first one in Orlando, Florida. And there was this big contentious meeting going on with the ministers. People were yelling and screaming. It was just kind of nasty. I don't know what it was about. Went into the men's room on a break, and there was Dr. Tom Johnson, who used to have a center down here in Woodland Hills. Tom was always dressed to the nines, it was in polyester, but he was always dressed to the nines. The 70s stuff, shock of white hair, He had the pink jacket and the white tie, that kind of thing. But he always was just absolutely meticulously groomed. And he's standing there, and he's one of our greats, right? And I'm a brand new minister, and I walk in, he's standing there, he's got paper towels, and he's wiping the sinks in the men's room. And me being me, I said, hey, Dr. Tom, they got people for that. What are you doing? He says, I always leave a place better than I found it. And he just put them in the trash and walked out. And I'm like, huh? Wow. What an interesting thing. He always leaves a place better than he found it. Without any reason other than to be that way. He wasn't looking for anything in return. He wasn't asking for attention. He was just doing that. And he was a happy man. Be a happy person. It's up to you. Bring your lover to the conscious level and let it into the world. And don't be attached to how people respond. Let them be wherever they are. But you'll find people that will respond. That's the law of attraction. It's a guarantee. And if you're in a long-term relationship and it hasn't been going so well, up-level the conscious love. Up-level your willingness to be accountable. Give it a shot. It can't hurt.